Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing climate breakdown, abrupt climate change, etc., ad infinitum, ad nauseum. Yes, the madness marches on. The news keeps on coming. Dr. Mail seems to be quite busy these days. He has quite a few articles, or he seems to have ramped up his dispatches, where he used to do like kind of a monthly article for Truth Out. It seems like he's doing something almost every week now. And I don't know if that reflects the pace at which things are progressing. I think that obviously that has something to do with it. Very quickly, I want to thank you all for continuing to subscribe to Black Bear News. I am exclusively going to be posting on Black Bear News, so hopefully people have gotten the message. But I won't be posting on Red Llama Music anymore, so hopefully everybody will just migrate over here. It seems to be happening, considering it's only been a week, it seems to be happening quite quickly. So thank you guys for helping in that endeavor. So I'm going to read this article from Dr. Mail. I don't know how long it is. Excuse me. Yeah. One moment, please. Okay. So this is from March 5th. That would be today. What day is it? I seem to be losing track. The Arctic is melting down as the Antarctic food chain is breaking. A draft UN report has warned that missing the 1.5°C warming target set by the Paris Climate Accords will multiply hunger, migration, and conflict around the globe. The 1.5°C target means limiting atmospheric temperatures from rising more than 1.5°C above what they were prior to the Industrial Revolution, when humans began emitting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. The report, slated to be finalized this coming September, provides several sobering points. The draft summary of the report can be read here. Link. The UK's Met Office predicts a 1 in 10 chance the global average will flicker over 1.5°C within 5 years. It's already been doing that, meaning we're already very close to the 1.5°C line. I believe last year, or in 2016, we were definitely above 1.5°C. Although the conservative estimate is that we could reach it by 2040. Okay, way too conservative. At 1.5°C, tropical reefs are at high risk of no longer being dominated by corals. The Arctic could become nearly ice-free in September, and there will be fundamental changes in ocean chemistry that could take several millennia to reverse. 2°C warming brings with it an additional 10 centimeters of sea level rise by 2100 and increases the risk of the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets collapsing, ensuring future generations will see multi-meter sea level rise. Meanwhile, much evidence signals that catastrophic change is already upon us. Indeed, when they're taking these really long-term predictions, about like what 2°C is going to be, I mean, they're just not even really, they're not really accounting for feedback loops and for exponential change. When we see 2°C, things are going to be changing so rapidly that we're very quickly could possibly see 3°C, and then and then all these timelines don't matter. Then we're talking about things changing. 10 centimeters of sea level rise by 2100 is stupid. It's ridiculous. We're going to reach 10 centimeters of sea level rise before 2040, definitely. The average high temperature for northern Greenland in February is approximately minus 20 Fahrenheit, making recent readings from a weather station there a stunning 63 Fahrenheit warmer than average. This would be the equivalent of Denver seeing a 112 Fahrenheit day in February. Think about that. Arctic sea ice levels are already at record lows for this time of year. Recently, Alaska's Bering Sea lost a full 1/3 of its ice in only 8 days. And even more recently, an area north of Greenland is already free of ice. So just imagine 112 degrees in Denver in February. So if these heat anomalies move out of the Arctic and into the rest of the world, which is extremely likely considering that, what happens in the Arctic is a forbearing of what's going to happen to other parts of the globe. Imagine that happening. Imagine that happening soon. Imagine that happening in the next 5 years. 112 degrees in Denver in February, or anywhere else for that matter. 112 degrees in Los Angeles in February. We've already been at heat wave range for much of the winter. We've been very, very anomalously high, and today, the the fake cloud generators were, very busy because it was very warm today. It was ramping up at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It felt like it was 80 degrees, and there was just, they were just coating the skies, trying to like keep it, keep people from going, what the entire fuck? Why is it 85 degrees, on March 5th? When it's, the temperature forecast was like high 60s or low 70s or whatever it was. I don't know what it was. Something ridiculous, but we're topping those forecasts like every single day. There is no ice where there is almost always ice. The Washington Post weather experts tweeted February 26th. There is open water north of Greenland where the thickest sea ice of the Arctic used to be. Lars Kaleschke, a German physicist, explained in a tweet, "It is not refreezing quickly because air temperatures are above freezing." While no other single weather anomaly can be attributed to anthropogenic climate disruption, what is happening in the Arctic is so far off the charts, scientists are aghast. Worldwide, the years 2014, 15, 16 were each a record warm year for Earth, with 2017 a close second place behind 2016. A report in the Anthropocene magazine recently showed that if carbon emissions remained unchecked, such multi-year global record temperature surges, along with their accompanying coral bleaching events, droughts, polar ice loss, storms, and floods, will likely become routine by stupid. Satellite images show that planetary warming is further accelerating the melting of the Greenland and Western Antarctic ice sheets, which is ramping up already accelerating sea level rise. Our world has changed. Massive parts of the biosphere are collapsing before our eyes. This is our new reality, and each of us must ask each day, how then shall I live my life? Across terra firma, there are stunning warning signs of abrupt ACD. Recently published study from the UK's Newcastle University warned that ACD will push European cities toward a breaking point. I'm not trying to talk to you, Siri. The study showed how floods, droughts, and heat waves will cause cities across the UK to be more heavily impacted by ACD than previously believed. Even the most optimistic scenarios, for example, showed 85% of cities located near rivers in the UK will face increased flooding. The lead author of the study, Selma Guerrero, told The Guardian, although southern European regions are adapted to cope with droughts, This level of change could be beyond breaking point. Meanwhile, in Africa, a recent report linked increasing violence to ACD across 2 regions that encompass 26 countries on the continent. The UN Security Council's report showed that ACD was a driver of conflict across West Africa and the Sahel, and showed that water scarcity and desertification were causing resources to dwindle, hence fueling increased conflict. A study published in the journal Science showed that melting Arctic sea ice is making it more difficult for predators such as the iconic polar bear to consume enough calories to survive. The research showed that polar bears require many more calories to survive than previously known, and this, coupled with rapidly diminishing sea ice, has left them in the struggle to survive. An ecologist affiliated with the study showed that the already declining bear populations could shrink by another 30% over the next 40 years. A recent Pentagon study showed that half of all U.S. military bases have been reporting climate extremes and threatening weather. Extremes such as storm surges, wildfires, and droughts, along with sea level rise, have become prevalent among hundreds of bases, and more than 780 military sites have reported drought conditions. The southern Louisiana region is already locked into losing somewhere between 1,200 and 2,800 square miles of coastal zone by 2067. Even if the state funded the full $92 billion for all the mitigation projects it would require to save parts of the coast from sea level rise, why even bother, y'all? Erosion and hurricanes, it would lose approximately 1,200 square miles of coast. This is due to the fact that the bottom 1/3 of the entire state of Louisiana has an average elevation of only 2.5 feet, and sea levels are expected to rise far higher than that. In fact, another recent study showed that even if the Paris Climate Accord goals were met, Earth is already set to see roughly 1 meter of sea level rise in the next 2 centuries, or 2 decades. Out on the U.S. West Coast, a mid-February report described the future of San Francisco's East Bay area looking a lot like Los Angeles, only with parts of it underwater due to worsening drought and sea level rise. Studies have long since shown that the Bay Area will become much drier as global temperatures continue to increase, and of course, high levels of sea rise are already locked in no matter what kind of mitigation measures are taken. Meanwhile, in New Zealand, warm weather is causing that country's water tower glaciers, those which communities rely upon for sustaining the flow of some of their major rivers, to melt at dramatic rates. Scientists there are describing the changes to glaciers they are witnessing as striking, and warned that New Zealand's hydropower generation, irrigation, and agriculture will be impacted in the future, and water availability will become a major issue. Back to the cryosphere, a recently published study found that mercury trapped in permafrost since the last ice age is now being released into the biosphere as permafrost is thawing and then melting. The discovery is a game changer. Paul Schuster, a hydrologist at the U.S. Geological Survey and lead author of the new study, told Science Daily. This is particularly worrisome as the study found that permafrost soils are the single largest reservoir of mercury on the planet, containing nearly twice as much mercury as all other soils, the oceans, and atmosphere combined. There would be no environmental problem if everything remained frozen, but we know the Earth is getting warmer, Schuster said, and although measurement of the rate of permafrost thaw was not part of this study, the thawing permafrost provides a potential for mercury to be released. That's just physics. The Arctic is displaying some of the most shocking impacts of abrupt ACD that we have seen anywhere else in the world. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the Arctic is currently undergoing the fastest decline in sea ice in at least the last 1,500 years. Furthermore, the Bering Sea recently lost fully one third of its total sea ice coverage in a mere 8 days. In a sign of the times, this December saw an LNG tanker across the Arctic during the winter without an icebreaker escort, the first time this has ever occurred during winter months. Other signs of big trouble in the oceans abound. In the Antarctic, major declines in krill are now threatening most of the wildlife there, including whales, leopard seals, and penguins. Industrial fishing and ACD are the primary causes, as krill populations have dropped by 40% in some areas of the Antarctic. Lastly, in this section, another recently published study showed that coral reefs are at risk of dissolving due to oceans becoming increasingly acidic. Scientists warn that global reefs could begin dissolving by 100 that as CO2 continues to form a weak acid in seawater and begins to dissolve reef sediments. Reef sediments are 10 times more vulnerable to acidification than the tiny coral animals that build the stony skeletons that form the reefs. I just have to pause and say that I never hear the date 2100 more than in a Darja Mail article. I know that he is, I think he's taking information from other reports and just repeating what they're saying. But it's super frustrating because we know that 2100 is absolutely not the date. Coral reefs are home to roughly 1/4 of all marine life. I mean, all this does is like scare people, but like go, oh, but it's a little ways away. This is really bad, but in 80 years, it's going to be really bad. Which is still really, really soon. But, it's far enough away that people are kind of go, it could be bad. Guess I'll get another latte. In February, a wildfire raging in southern Australia was large enough to be seen from space. The area burned in the fire was larger than Singapore and New York. Meanwhile, scientists from Columbia University once again confirmed the link between ACD and increased incidence and ferocity of wildfires. They estimated that between 1984 and 2015, ACD had caused an additional 4.2 million hectares of forest to burn, an area approximately 3 times the size of the state of Connecticut. Previous studies had already shown that ACD had contributed to the fact that the area impacted by forest fires in the American West had doubled in just the last 30 years alone. Record warm temperatures continue to be set around the globe. Even the Arctic, where the sun is not shining at all during winter months, saw the warmest December on record. On that note, the northernmost weather station on Earth, located at Cape Morris, Jesup in Greenland, only 400 miles from the North Pole, experienced above freezing temperatures for 2 days in a row. The Arctic wasn't the only place experiencing record warm temperatures during the winter. The U.S. East Coast saw numerous temperature records across several states, while portions of the central U.S. and Midwest from Texas to the Great Lakes were facing flooding from record-setting precipitation. Washington, D.C. saw its earliest 80-degree day on record in February. Pittsburgh saw a 78 Fahrenheit day, which beat the previous record by 10 degrees. Meanwhile, high temperature records were set this February from Atlantic City to Manchester to Wilmington, among dozens of other cities. An even longer list of cities saw record highs for the entire month of February set as well. South Bend in Indiana saw a 500-year flood event, meaning a flooding event extreme enough that it is estimated to have only a 1 in 500 chance of occurring. The Ohio Valley and the Great Lakes region were beset by flooding as well due to snowmelt and ongoing major precipitation events. Scientists warn that these anomalies are likely a glimpse at what we can expect more broadly as the planet continues to warm. Denial and reality. In an interview with Piers Morgan, aired on Britain's ITV, President Donald Trump, when asked point blank about a stance on ACD, stated amazingly, the ice caps were going to melt. They were going to be gone by now, but now they're setting records. Needless to say, as has been made all too clear in this dispatch, among dozens of others, the opposite is true. Ice, both on land and in sea, is actually melting at record rates. But then Trump has never let facts stand in the way of his own warped version of reality. His administration is now seeking large cuts to the country's ACD research infrastructure, including satellite science centers and education, via his budget proposal. News also came out recently that fossil fuel lobbyist turned EPA Chief Scott Pruitt was closely involved in the scrubbing of the EPA's climate websites, according to the emails that have surfaced. Speaking of Pruitt, he recently had the gall to say that ACD could be good for humanity. During an interview with Michael Barbaro of the New York Times, Pruitt was criticizing scientists, warning of the dangers of ACD when he said, I think it's pretty arrogant for people in 2018 to say, you know what, we know that what the ideal surface temperature should be in the year 2100. Multiple prestigious climate scientists resoundingly rebuked Pruitt's absurd claim. He also He was also contradicted by the government's own climate assessment report. Meanwhile, Alaska Senator and fossil fuel lobbyist Lisa Murkowski has, on the one hand, stated that it is time for a Republican Party to take ACD seriously, while at the same time salivating over the fact that more than 1 million acres in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge are now set to be opened for drilling. More news on the reality front comes from U.S. intelligence agencies. While the Trump administration continues its denial antics, the agencies have warned that ACD is bound to fuel disasters and violent conflicts around the world. In their recently released annual summary of global threats, the agencies warn that ACD and other associated environmental trends are likely to fuel economic and social discontent and possibly upheaval through 2018. Also on the reality front, Michigan Utility Consumers Energy has announced it will phase out its electrical production from coal by the year 2040 in an effort to slash emissions of greenhouse gases way too late. While it is always a positive sign to see at least some government agencies, politicians, and companies acknowledging the reality of ACD and the need to work toward mitigation, anything short of a massive global government-coordinated, immediate, full-scale effort will not be enough to sufficiently confront the climate crisis. Says Darja Mail. Different day, same news. Next article, ancient carbon is coming from Arctic soil. It might be fine, but it might be terrible. That's the weirdest headline ever. It might be fine, but it might be terrible. Scientists, this is from Chris Mooney from the Washington Post. Scientists on Tuesday published new evidence that old or even ancient carbon pulled out of the atmosphere and stored in the bodies of plants hundreds or thousands of years ago is being set loose again from soils in the Arctic region. It's a potentially worrying indicator that these permafrost soils may already be worsening the problem of climate change. However, scientists are still debating just how much old carbon Arctic soils should release normally even without climate change, leaving the ultimate significance of the findings unclear. The new study, which was published in the journal Environmental Research Letters, employed radiocarbon dating to examine the content of river and lake waters in Canada's Northwest Territories. And in 2014, it found an increasing prevalence of older dissolved carbon and carbon dioxide in the waters as the summer advanced. The research also discovered one case of carbon and methane gas that was more than 2,000 years old. The new work isn't definitive on the question of increasing permafrost carbon emissions, but it's something to worry about, said Joshua Dean, the study's lead author and researcher at the Vrije University in Amsterdam. I would say if you're looking at anything pushing several hundred years old to 1,000 years old, then you have to start wondering whether that should be coming out of this kind of system, said Dean, who published the work with 11 colleagues from universities and institutions in Britain. Over thousands of years, the Arctic has stored up massive amounts of carbon as plants have died but have not fully decayed because of the region's cold temperatures. Instead, their roots and other plant parts have been preserved in the frozen soil. Layer upon layer of Arctic soil is built up, representing a kind of time capsule with the oldest layers and the oldest carbon generally found at the greatest depths. As a warming climate thaws as permafrost, more and more of the older carbon will be broken down by microbes and released as carbon dioxide or methane, with the potential to greatly warm the planet, but it's not clear how much carbon is vulnerable or how fast such a release could happen. That's where the new research comes in. Scientists know the precise rate at which one variant of carbon found in the atmosphere, carbon-14, decays into another variant. Thus, by determining the ratios of these types of carbon in samples taken from the Arctic, they can determine whether when the carbon was first drawn out of the atmosphere and into a plant, its age. The new research is one in a string of studies that have used such a method to detect old carbon emerging from Arctic lakes or rivers or Arctic soils going back at least to 2009. In a paper that year, Ted Schuer of Northern Arizona University and his colleagues found older carbon emerging from thawed permafrost emerging from thawed permafrost regions in the 8-Mile Lake watershed of the Alaska Range. Since then, a 2016 study in Nature Geoscience examined Arctic lakes in multiple regions that found that methane age from lakes is nearly identical to the age of permafrost soil carbon thawing around them. Meanwhile, a 2018 study in Nature Climate Change found that carbon dioxide and methane emissions from lakes in Alaska mostly came from carbon that had been fixed by plants within the last 3,000 to 4,000 years, but also that a small percentage was even older than that. And then there's the latest study, which was aimed at trying to establish a basic measurement of how much old carbon is flowing into the waters of the Northwest Territories region. Determining whether those amounts are unusual or whether levels are changing remains for subsequent work, Dean said. So what does it all add up to? That's the big question. Schur said in an email that these studies taken together suggest that increased old sea release is a fingerprint of changing Arctic carbon cycle. Not sure what the significance of ancient carbon is, but I'm sure it isn't good. The researchers further suggest that whether permafrost carbon of a particular age is considered old or young can depend in part upon the type of Arctic environment from which it emerges, and in some cases may not really be old or ancient until it has aged between 5,000 to 10,000 years. One reason it's difficult to find a smoking gun in this area is a phenomenon called cryoturbation, which refers to a mixing of soil layers due to seasonal freeze and thaw process, brings old carbon up and young carbon down into the soil column, said Anna Liljadal, a professor at the University of Alaska at Fairbanks, who studies Arctic ecosystems. Still, Dean said that even though his study can't clearly prove that the Arctic has shifted in such a way as to release more older carbon, his results are concerning. Certainly, it's a warning sign for the future. Okay. And very quickly, I'm kind of running out of time on this video, but I wanted to cover a political article from Truthout. This is alarming. As case against so-called Black identity extremists proceeds, emails reveal Dallas FBI's surveillance of First Amendment activity. This is, going back to J. Edgar Hoover days and the, the infiltration of CIA and the FBI into radical groups. Excuse me. The government surveillance and ongoing case against Black activist Christopher Daniels, which may become the first prosecution of a person tracked under the new FBI classification of Black identity extremist. And that's just scary right there. We can just stop right there and be, although, what is old is new again, and what is new really isn't very new, could open the door to a wider dragnet for Black activists engaged in police reform and anti-racist organization across the nation. Daniels, better known in the area as Rakim Balagun, has been in federal custody since December 12, 2017, when heavily armed FBI agents stormed his one-bedroom apartment in Dallas, rousing Daniels and his 15-year-old son from their beds and rushing them outside, where they were separated while Daniels was detained wearing only his underwear. The agents recovered 2 firearms, including an assault rifle, from his apartment during the raid. The government indicted Daniels for unlawful possession of the firearms, arguing that Daniels' misdemeanor conviction in 2007 for domestic assault in Tennessee prohibited his possession. But as Foreign Policy has reported in a detailed investigation into Daniels' case, the raid has been the result of more than 2 years of FBI surveillance initiated on nothing more than Daniels' First Amendment protected protest activities in Texas and his anti-law enforcement rhetoric. The details of the case are strongly suggest Daniels was tracked under a new FBI classification for domestic terror threats, Black identity extremists, The new FBI design category includes individuals who commit crimes or engage in violence in response to perceived racism and injustice in American society. Oh, yeah. So if you're protesting injustice in this country, you are, you're a domestic terror threat. Of course, we know this. We know this is why they're shutting down YouTube channels. Lisa Slimak, a spokesperson for the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Northern District of Texas, declined to comment on Daniel's prosecution since the case remains pending. Janella Newsom, a spokesperson for the Dallas FBI, also declined to comment. Daniel's brother, who goes by Yefeu Balagun, believes that the political climate of the last couple of years may have paved the way for even more intensive surveillance of his brother. The FBI monitored him for the past 25 months, and so this is a little bit before the July 7, 2016 shooting in downtown Dallas, and I think it was heightened after the shooting, Balagun told Truth Out. I think in that political climate, the powers that be in the city of Dallas needed to try and make some connections, and I think Rakim was probably the scapegoat used for that. Of course, the FBI can track and arrest this guy, but not the shooter in Parkland, who was, clearly off the rails, and people have been giving reports about him, but they were like, nah. Again, why? I ask. Daniels is co-founder of Guerrilla Mainframe, a group that supports self-defense weapons training, which came together with the open carry group Huey P. Newton Gun Club at the Austin rally. During the December hearing, Kiley also made note of Daniels' Facebook post in which he expressed support for Micah X. Johnson, who fatally shot 5 police officers in Dallas on July 7, 2016, and Tremaine Wilburn, who was accused of killing a Memphis, Tennessee police officer. Although that's probably not something you want to do on Facebook. The FBI investigated and monitored Daniels beginning in March 2015, keeping a close watch on him even as he traveled in Detroit until his arrest in December. Those close to Daniels said the FBI also monitored Black activists who associated with him and contacted at least one of his associates in South Carolina. Daniels' brother, Balagun, said that during the past year, 2 FBI agents have visited his workplaces. When we look at the Black identity extremist classification, it has racial component at its very core. So that's why we believe that Rakim is a political prisoner. We want a rescinding of the Black identity extremist classification, Balagun told Truth Out. Very rightly so. I mean, what the fuck? Although I don't know, our at one point I believe that white nationalists were coded a terror threat, and that they were taken off the list of domestic terror threats recently, something like that. The Black identity extremist classification seems to be part of a trend of expanding surveillance agency powers. The FBI gained sweeping new powers in 2008 with changes to the Attorney General guidelines for domestic FBI operations. The FBI's Domestic Investigations and Operations Guide, which implements the guidelines, introduced a new type of investigation called an assessment, which does not require any factual indication of wrongdoing or a threat to national security. The agency can conduct assessments on Black identity extremists or other broad categories of people using such classifications to get around profiling claims. Yeah, just more evidence of the tightening of the surveillance state. According to a tally kept by the Southern Poverty Law Center, attacks by right-wing white extremists have been increasingly common in the past 2 decades since Timothy McVeigh's terror attack in Oklahoma. Moreover, a Government Accountability Office report notes that of the 85 violent extremist incidents that resulted in death since September 12, 2001, far-right white violent extremist groups were responsible for 62 which is 73%. There appears to be a focus by law enforcement on the person under protected activity, and then a hand-wringing over that, rather than an understanding that they need to focus on criminality, not the First Amendment protected activity, German said. Again, yes, right? There seems to be a lot of, shutting down of people, talking about things or protesting things, when we should be worried about, the actual things that are resulting in violence and criminal activity and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. According to the New York Times, the FBI currently has about 1,000 domestic terrorism cases open involving white supremacists, black separatists, militias, sovereign citizens, environmentalists, abortion and animal liberation activists, and Puerto Rican nationalists. Daniel's brother, Yefeu Balogun told Truth Out that the idea that the FBI is going after white supremacists based solely on First Amendment activity does not sit well with him. Rather, he said the agency should only investigate people based on evidence of criminal wrongdoing. Ding. The fact that the FBI is monitoring Americans at this particular time at the level that they are without warrants and things of this nature, that's the scary part, Balogun said. We don't think the government themselves should be monitoring people this closely. We believe in the freedoms that the Constitution gives to us. And with that, I'm going to end this video because it has gone on quite long. Thank you all, as always, for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience, and for continuing to tune in. Please continue to subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Tell a friend, bring them on over. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. I hope to be back tomorrow with another video. Until then, peace.